You know, is it possible to make any snare drum sound great in the studio? Could I go right outside to the garbage can and just pull a snare drum out of it, no matter what type it is, what condition it is, and with a little bit of work, make it sound great? We're about to find out. Thanks for swinging by my YouTube channel. Let's get to it. Now, this idea of taking a really crappy snare drum, something that's low rent, low dollar, and doing some refurbing on it, it's not a new idea. I've seen it in a lot of places. Mike Dawson, formerly of Modern Drummer, who's currently with Drum Factory Direct, he's one of the people that I remember doing something sort of like this. But this idea has been sitting in my head for a long time, and it was spurred on by a conversation that I had several years ago. I was in Nashville taking some drum lessons, and one of those lessons was with the incredible George Lawrence. And if you don't know George, among professional musicians, he's like one of the guru guys to go to study. And when I was taking a lesson with George, this has been 4 or 5 years ago, I asked him, I said, man, tell me, out of all the snare drums that you own, which one would be surprising in terms of you pull it out in the studio and it always sounds amazing, and it might be $100 snare drum. It's some crappy thing that most drummers that are gear snobs wouldn't use at all. And George walked over to a shelf that he had, and he pulled off this purplish kind of snare drum, and he said, this is it right here. This is the sleeper drum. Every time I take it out and put it on a session, and he's done sessions from New York to Nashville to Jackson, Mississippi, where a lot of great blues records have been made. Anyway, he said, I put this drum up, and every single time engineers flip out. And he said, this is a made in Japan Luan shelled snare drum. You know, maybe it's worth $100, maybe $150. It's not worth very much, but it sounds amazing. And so immediately I got on trying to find myself one of these made in Japan Luan shell snares. And it wasn't, within a month, I walked into a Guitar Center, and sitting right there on the rack of used snare drums was a flame yellow 60s Majestic snare drum. Exactly the kind of thing that George was talking about. And it's probably made in the same factory even. And so I looked at the price tag. They wanted a little bit more for it than it was worth. I offered them $100. Sold right there. I had a brand new snare drum, brought it home, put some new heads and new snares on it, really tweaked it, tuned it up. Didn't do a lot to the hardware, just kind of kept it as it was. And every session I've ever used it on, this drum sounds amazing. Now, flash forward to a couple of months ago, my wife comes in and she says, yeah, I was walking the dogs and I noticed in somebody's garbage can, they had a snare drum. And I thought, well, maybe you could use this. Now, if you know anything about me, you know I kind of love snare drums. And if we can get this one working and sounding great, I think this will be like number 85 or 86 in the collection of snare drums. I'm interested to see, can we take what probably costs about $100 at best on Amazon or one of these online sites? Can we take one of these drums and add some things to it, change some things out, and make it sound amazing? Let's check this drum out and let's get started. All right, so here we have this Westbury snare drum. What is this drum? It looks like it's some kind of bass wood or some kind of really soft wood, a lot like a Luan. The drum's not worth much. I'd let you hear what it sounds like before, but the heads are blown out. So here's what we're gonna do. In real time, I'm just gonna take all of the hardware off this drum. You know, there's a lot of talk with snare drums about what's a good snare drum, what's a crappy snare drum. And back in the day when I didn't have a whole lot of money, I really tried to do the best I could with whatever drum I had. Back early in my career, my 20s, you know, I tried to take the 3 or 4 snare drums that I had and make them sound like anything. But now one of the reasons I have such a large snare collection is that there are a lot of snare drums that are just one-trick ponies. What do I mean by that? Anybody need a broken head? One-trick ponies. They do one thing really well. In fact, if you try and get a lot of different things out of that snare drum, you're going to be sorely disappointed because they won't do much. Piccolo snares. You can tune a piccolo snare down, but most piccolo snares are not going to sound great if you tune them way, way down. They sound really good in a super high register. With a lot of these made in Japan snare drums, these really cheap snare drums, if you're trying to make them sound like a $500 Ludwig snare or a $1,000 Gretsch snare, you're going to be sorely disappointed because they're just not that. If you think of every snare drum as having kind of a spirit or a character that it embodies, and what your job is as a person who is enthusiastic about drums and that wants to be able to get the best you can out of any particular drum that you've got to play, it's sort of a journey. It's a joy of sorts to sit there and have to find what is the sound of this snare drum. And I guarantee you, every snare drum is going to have some kind of sound to it. And something that you can find usable if you just take time. Now, obviously, we're going to need some tools to do this. Right now, I've got a small adjustable wrench, and I've got kind of a universal Phillips head screwdriver. Along with replacing the heads and the snares on this drum, one of the things I'm also going to do is help to make up for where they save money on these cheap snare drums. Now, a lot of times, obviously they use wood that's probably not as good as, say, a maple or a birch, but they also tend to skimp on the hardware. Now, these lugs here actually don't seem too bad. We're going to keep these. We're even going to keep the internal muffler, but I am going to change the hoops out. The hoops that they generally will use on these drums are really very, very thin hoops. They're easily bendable. Sometimes you can even bend them. This one looks like it's a little bent just from tuning it too tight on one side. And so what we're going to do is we're going to replace the top and bottom hoops on these with something that would be considered more of a professional grade hoop. I'm going to keep the tension rods to keep the price of this refurb down, but I'm also going to change out the snare throw off. Now, I don't want to cut any holes in this drum. I don't want to put any more work into it than this hour it's going to take to refurb this. So I'm going to keep the butt plate that's here. It's a perfectly functional butt plate as far as I can tell, but we are going to replace the strainer. The strainer's kind of it's okay. It's not very sensitive. It has a plastic tension knob. Just usually this is the single point of failure on any of these really cheap drums. So I'm going to take out this really, really cheap snare strainer, and we're going to replace it with something much better. Much better. All right, so the next thing is we're going to take some Windex and a microfiber cloth. I'm just going to give this thing a quick cleaning because it was sitting in somebody's garbage can. So we are going to try and clean it up a little bit at least. Definitely dirty. Probably been sitting in the corner of some kid's room. And notice that I'm not spraying the Windex on the drum. I spray it on the cloth. Mainly because I don't want to get it just everywhere. Not a whole lot of scratches or anything on this thing. It's actually in really good shape for a drum that just had gotten thrown away. We're going to need a few things to complete this refurbishment. And so to start with, obviously, we're going to need some fresh heads. And on this one, I'm going to put a 14-inch Genera, not the Genera Dry, just the regular 14-inch Genera batter head. And my favorite, the Snareside 300. I had one of these that's been sitting around. You can tell by this label, it's been sitting around for quite a while. So we're going to use those. We're gonna put on some 20 strand pure sound snares. I'm also going to use, if you can see them kind of in this overhead cam here, I'm gonna use these nylon washers instead of just the washers that came on those tension rods for a smoother tuning experience. And it should help us hold the drum in tune a lot more. Now, the other thing that I'm gonna need is some new hoops. And what I have back here from Drum Factory Direct, it's not a paid endorsement or advertisement for them. I bought these with my own money. I've got a pair of these, what they call stick saver hoops. You saw these a lot in like the 60s and maybe the 70s with Slingerland snare drums. And it looks kind of like a triple flange hoop, except the top flange kind of comes in a little bit. And it's supposed to be a little bit better at not chipping your sticks away, hence the stick saver moniker. A couple of reasons why I got them. These were the only ones that they had a top and a bottom hoop in stock for. And also, I don't have any snare drums right now with stick saver hoops. Thought it'd be kind of an interesting comparison as far as hoops, how they feel, how they contribute to the sound, and I'm just kind of curious. And I didn't want to have to wait another few weeks for them to get their stock back up. So let's put that new strainer on. So the snare strainer that I'm going to use is this Ludwig P81. And not only did I pick it up because it's a pretty no muss, no fuss kind of snare strainer, real robust, it'll last you a long time, but also the holes match exactly to the shell of this Westbury snare drum, so I don't have to drill any holes. Now, for the bearing edges and the prep on both sides, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna run my finger on the bearing edge, and it's fairly flat. If we were to put it on one of these glass tables and shine a light, we may find some bumps in it. It's got a nice angle on it. One thing I am going to use, and I use this a lot for these kinds of drums, is I'm gonna use a little bit of beeswax, and I'm just gonna take this little block of beeswax, and I'm gonna run it around the circumference of the drum. And not only will it lubricate the wood a little bit, this cheap wood is kind of dry. It'll lubricate it a little bit. It'll also give a little bit of grease to the head so the head can slide around. And my hope is that this wax will settle into any spots that aren't very level and help make this bearing edge a lot more true for us as we try and tune this and seat the heads. Make sure you save your boxes and at least get your player's points off of there. I've started giving my boxes for heads to one of my students. I think he's gotten half a dozen free pairs of sticks by using his player points over there on the D'Addario site. That is an advertisement for them, by the way. Didn't get paid for it, but I'm sure they'll appreciate that. All right, so yeah, that's gonna sit real nice. Take that stick saver hoop. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take this little blue washer and slide it through. In addition to the washer that's already there, the metal washer that's there is what they call a captured washer. It's not going to come off of there at all. What this nylon washer does is it makes the tuning a little bit smoother. And since it's got the little collar on there, I find that just helps keep things straight and even more in alignment because it drops through the little hole in the rim. Just make sure everything goes nice and straight. The thing I find about these thicker professional level hoops, professional grade hoops, is that they're a bit stiffer than the really thin, weak hoops that come on these snare drums. So you tend to get a much truer tuning out of this process. There's not as much flex in the rim under tension. That's a pretty good start, I think. I'm going to leave it right there for now. We're going to flip this over, and we're going to put on, make sure all the screws are tight. We're going to put on the snare side. Now we're going to put on that snare side 300 head. With the exception of a few of my jazz snare drums, this snare 300 head goes on just about every single snare drum that I own. I think we're gonna get something good out of this. I really do. It looks, yeah, it's a clean drum. It looks good. Now, with the snares, you gotta be using the 20 strand, 14 inch Pure Sounds. They're not cheap, but they're worth every penny that you pay. I'm not gonna use the string. Since this strainer really likes tape, I'm gonna grab some newer Pure Sound tapes. I'm gonna try this first. People call them straps. I call them nylon tape. It's just a piece of Mylar, basically, like this. Gonna kind of get it halfway, give it a little bend so that it already sort of knows where the middle is. This next part has a little bit of voodoo in it. Everybody has a slightly different way of getting their snares to sit in the right place and to work well with the tensioning system for the strainer. You just have to play around with it and see what works, what doesn't work. What is the drum like? What is the drum not like? What does it respond to? I start with the snares pretty well centered on the head. All right, so as you can tell from looking at the top down, when I've got these tensioned, they're sitting pretty well in the middle of the snare bed. And if I want to dry it up a little bit more, I think that's a pretty good start, actually. Go a little tighter here. Let's see what this sounds like. If I don't have my finger on there, definitely has some overring to it, which we can either use this internal muffler to get rid of. Let's put the internal muffler on, see how that works, to maybe damp the drum a little bit. Definitely brings it more into focus. That's not a bad sounding snare drum. I mean, honestly, it's not a bad drum. I may even try a zero ring on it and just get an idea of what's going to really tame those overtones down. Or I may find, once I get it under the mic and find a tuning that really seems pleasing, I might like that overring. So let's take this drum down to the studio and see what it sounds like. All right, so I really hate these single hit standalone kind of demo videos that are all over YouTube. They really don't tell you anything about what that drum's gonna sound like in context. So let's get this drum mixed in with all of the kit mics. Let's put it into an actual mix of some really good music, and let's put this drum through its paces. All right, so there you go. There's the demo of the free garbage can Westbury snare drum. And just to let you know how much money I put into this, on the side here, I'm going to do an itemized list of how much money I actually put into this drum. It was under $100. And you know what? It was a great investment. I'm really happy with the way this thing sounds. Again, it's a one-trick pony, but it's a heck of a trick that it does. I'm sure this thing's going to end up in some more tracks in the near future. Now, if you like videos like this, please hit the like down there and make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. And I'd love to do more of these videos, love to test out more snare drums for you. And that's all I got for you today. Until next time, I'll see you when I see you. Thanks.